What kind of kid were you? Back in middle or high school, were you the rational one, or were you the type to jump off a cliff if your friends did? I happen to be the latter in this analogy. I was until I reached college where I actually didn't care what others thought of me. For most of my primary school life, I had the same friends and felt comfortable with them because I wasn't the type to make any friends. These friends would always seem to pick on me for whatever, the K through 12 version of hazing, but I never recognized it and passed it off as typical friend stuff up until the 8th grade, where their pressuring turned into a fight for my life. Mick was our quote-unquote leader, as he was the oldest of us at 15 from being held back a year like everyone else. Benny and Jacob were both 14, and I was the younger one at just 12. I'd met the group when I first arrived at school. I'd been homeschooled for the beginning years of my education on the account of my parents being afraid of me going out into the quote-unquote dangerous world of Utah. As my dad said, Mick and the gang wanted to introduce me to the school, and that quickly turned into making me wish I'd never met them. The group didn't chastise fellow students or anything like that. Everyone kept to themselves, never really got in trouble at school. However, after school, it was when I'd see the group's actual interests. My friends liked to do things such as spray painting absurd things like pentagrams, crucifixes, or absurd phrases or words on other people's houses or on buildings. They also liked to mess with animals like the stray cats or dogs around the town, but they didn't seem to like me watching some of their methods that I assumed was because of my age at the time. I never participated in any of it, but I was always the lookout as Mick appointed me to prove my reliability. Mick always seemed to be the responsible one in the group. I think the charisma he had kind of blinded me. He seemed nice and caring for everyone like we were all his little brothers. Mick even taught me how to box or fight, as I didn't have any knowledge on anything like that from being sheltered and coddled most of my life. I'd gotten pretty close to everyone in the group over the years of being in school, but Mick seemed the most like a big brother to me. We'd all stay close friends during school and always looked out for each other. That's when I reached the end of 8th grade. Mick called a meeting for the group over at a factory at the other end of town. I told everyone in the group chat that I couldn't go out past 6, but everyone was telling me that it's urgent. My mom already called yours. We'll get you home before 7, Mick replied. I sighed and told him I'd be on my way before grabbing my phone and heading downstairs, where I got the okay from my parents. I hopped on my bike and pedaled it to the factory, taking breaks to text in the group chat. A few minutes later, I arrived at the factory to see everyone drinking some sodas and talking. Once I got there, Mick handed me a can and cracked it open to continue talking about the gang. About girls, Fortnite, briefly talking about grass before Mick changed the subject. "What's this all about, by the way?" I asked. Mick nodded. "We have a tradition in the group, to make sure you're actually willing to be in the group," Mick told me. Then he handed me a covered tub. "Nobody stuck around as long as you, so we trust you to do this," he stated. "Basically, just take the tub inside, set it down in the right spot, whistle, and open it up. That simple," Jacob explained to me. "I don't know, this doesn't seem right. I could get in trouble," I hesitated. Mick put his hand on my shoulder. "This place has been closed down since before we were born. Nothing's going to happen. Trust me," Mick said. I gulped and took the tub, then listened to Mick's instruction. I walked inside the factory and started moving through the halls as Mick told me to do. As I did, I saw the same phrases and symbols the gang had painted around town, but with black smears across them. I walked through the halls as I heard grinding and dripping coming from the beams, as I just focused on the moonlight coming in through the open roof. I then found the center of the factory and set the tub down. I whistled the best I could before opening up the tub, and I immediately regretted it. In the dim moonlight, I saw a pair of bright blue eyes that started to get closer to me. I quickly pulled out my phone and shined the flashlight at it. With my crappy flashlight, I could see a boy around my age ahead of me. "What are you doing here? We shouldn't be here," I called out. The boy got close enough for me to see his pale skin and the stitches across his arms, face, eyes, and mouth. "I'm looking for a new friend. You brought me an offering, so you must be that friend," the boy told me. I looked down in the tub and nearly vomited. 2 crucifixes were stuck together with the limbs of a small cat and dog, with the bodies of the animals stitched together with their organs exposed. I looked up and saw the boy smiling before watching his teeth grow with a loud cracking sound into large fangs. His fingers shot out blood as bone-like appendages pierced through his skin. Seeing the same happen as the same appendages split out of his shoulders to the length of his arms, he started laughing a high-pitched cackle, and as he did, I bolted down the halls. I panted heavily as I sprinted down the halls and heard more grinding and cackling, hearing it drift off as I reached the entrance to see my friends. "Guys, there's something in there," I shouted as I reached them. Mick nodded at the other 2 and they grabbed me. "We know, Drew," he said coldly. I struggled as Benny and Jacob dragged me back into the factory, but I dug deep and decided to fight back. I stomped on both feet of my quote-unquote friends and headbutted Jacob to the ground before punching Benny hard in his stomach to drop him. I was going to run before Mick stopped me by standing in front of me as he grabbed me by the throat and lifted me up. I choked as I heard the grinding getting closer. "This is what friends do. They help each other," Mick said as he strangled me. I heard the laughing getting closer and closer, so I knew I had to do something. I punched Mick in the throat, and as he dropped me, I kicked him as hard as I could in the jewels to drop him to his knees. "I don't want to be friends anymore," I told Mick as I punched him across the face. I stepped over his body and ran out of the factory before getting against the wall as I heard the laughing come up right to the entrance. "3 new friends? This makes me so happy," I heard the boy giggle. I then heard 3 pairs of screams and listened as they got farther and farther away until I couldn't hear them anymore. I heard on the news that Mick, Ben, and Jacob were never found after they were reported missing. The police said it was a cult ritual gone wrong. We moved shortly after, as it spooked my parents, and I was put back into homeschool. I did find new friends though, ones that did pressure me and cared for my comfortability. One thing to take away from this long story is stick up for yourself. Peer pressure can be a terrible thing, and it could even lead to your death. I grew up as an only child, it being only me and my parents living together up until I was 10. When I turned 10, my birthday surprise was my parents adopting a new kid who was my age. His name was Montel, and what people would call a very reserved person. He didn't talk much, nor did he show much emotion, as even when he first saw me, he had little to no expression. Over the years, he would become more and more odd and usual, until one day where he'd cross the line. We lived in a pretty small town and kind of the shitty part of it. I honestly don't know why my parents would want another kid, as we could hardly even sustain ourselves. To keep clothes on our backs and food in our stomachs, both our parents would work pretty intense jobs that took up a lot of time, which left Montel and I to go to school and spend the rest of our day doing whatever we could until our parents got back. This also let me observe Montel, so to speak, letting me watch his habits and stuff like that. The one odd thing about Montel I first noticed is that he never ate or drank. If you were to look at him, you'd see he's a healthy-looking person, not malnourished or anything like he should be. We'd taken him to the doctor after noticing this, and they even said he doesn't have an eating disorder or anything like that. One day I was watching TV with Montel and eating some heated-up pizza and offered him a slice, but he just looked at me almost in disgust. "I don't eat food like that," he told me. "What do you mean? It's just pizza," I told him. "I only eat organic food," Montel said. "You mean like apples and stuff?" I asked. He just shook his head and continued watching TV. Another weird thing about him is he hated light touching him. He always wore a jacket or hoodie and some gloves, keeping his face hidden whenever a light was on with a face mask. Speaking of which, he never took that mask off, at least in front of everyone. At school one day, I was called to the office as my mom had called to say that Montel was sent home sick, which I thought was weird as the kid never got sick. So I went through the rest of my day at school before coming home, and once I got home, I saw something that still frightens me to this day. Trailing from the side of the house up to the doorstep was a trail of crimson leading up to the door. I hesitantly walked up to the door and opened it to see more blood leading into the house, and I followed it. I followed the trail down the hall and into Montel's room. "Montel, are you okay?" I called out. I walked up to his door and opened it to see a horrifying and unnerving sight. Montel was on the floor with his back to me, hunched over the body of a person. I saw that person's face and saw blood dripping out the side of his mouth, as I also saw his neck missing a large chunk. Montel suddenly stopped what he was doing and looked back at me, and then I finally got to see his real face. His jaw was unhinged with what looked like thousands of razor-sharp teeth that were coated in blood and chunks of flesh and guts. I saw the body of the man he was feasting on and saw a crater in the man's stomach, having organs spilled out on the sides of it. I stumbled back until I fell to the floor with tears and sweat starting to drip down my face. Montel let out an inhuman roar as he stood up, and as he did, I did the same, running back down the hall and out of the door towards the street. As soon as I got onto the street, suddenly a car came out of nowhere and ran into me, sending at least 10 feet away. I rolled onto my back, feeling what had to be broken ribs. As I looked in front of me at the car, the driver came out and went to come over to me when he was tackled into his car. Montel jumped on top of the driver and sank his teeth into the skull of the man, to then rip it out, which sprayed blood everywhere, including on me. I fell backwards as Montel continued to rip out and consume the skull and brain of the driver until he was getting off the man and stalking towards me. As he pounced onto me, suddenly a chunk of his skull was blown out. After a loud gunshot went off, Montel's body fell on top of me, and I screamed as I pushed him off. Seeing Montel missing half of his head with blood pouring out everywhere. I looked to see Montel and saw my dad. My mom ran over and held me up as I looked at my dead brother. My mom told me and she brushed my hair. My parents helped me in the car and took me to the hospital where I was treated for 4 broken ribs and concussions. We managed to scrape up enough money to move to a somewhat better part of town, as we didn't want to even spend a second back in that house. If you ever got an adopted sibling, please be sure you know who they really are.